The line is drawn in the sand in the Middle East. The United States is prepared to use its full military might to stop Iraq. The heavy bombers it deploys to the Persian Gulf are 30-year-old B-52s. Defense analysts believe America may wake up to a disturbing truth. The nation has prepared for a different war, a nuclear war with another superpower. Its forces may be ill-equipped to fight a smaller regional conflict. The Cold War ended this year. No one believes the Soviet Union wants to destroy the West or dominate the world. Yet there are 1,400 missiles, 160 bombers, and 6 submarines heavy with nuclear weapons ready for attack. The United States keeps over 1,000 nuclear missiles, 350 bombers, and 30,000 nuclear warheads in all. They are the responsibility of the Strategic Air Command, and SAC believes it's a healthy balance. The Cold War may be over, but Cold Warriors won't fade away.
That old soldiers never die. They just fade away.
After 40 years of looking down the barrel of your enemy's gun, how do you greet him at a social function? If you're General John T. Chain, Commander-in-Chief of the Strategic Air Command, it won't be a tea party. Those are his words. Early in 1990, SAC opened its doors to the highest-ranking Soviet military entourage ever to visit its headquarters. The Commander-in-Chief proved a gracious host, eager to make a point. With the Russian generals comfortable in their chairs, SAC had its first chance to launch an attack against its enemy, using a slide projector and a pointer.
The Soviet Union has built twice as many intercontinental range ballistic missiles as the United States.
This was not a public relations presentation about life in the American military. General Chain's staff presented a statistic-filled slideshow, sharp in tone, outlining how many Soviet missiles, their missiles, were pointed at American targets.
The vast majority of these are on alert, ready to launch within a few minutes' notice.
It was part scolding lecture, part flashy display of Air Force intelligence. The chairman of the Supreme Soviet Committee on Defense was not impressed.
I've begun to feel very uncomfortable here in the United States, considering all the armaments we have. Imagine if they start launching all those missiles, we would perish here together with you. I must remind you that you were the first to invent atomic weapons. We simply had to catch up with you and to create our own atomic weapons.
General Chain did not retreat. He told the Soviets neither side should bargain away too many of their nuclear missiles.
If we get down to a very low number on either side, then it could lead to miscalculation in that one side might think that they could attack the other side successfully, and that would be very unstable.
Only the Russians' travel schedule and an exchange of lovely parting gifts ended this verbal microcosm of the Cold War. The consummate American Cold Warrior had no apologies for ambushing his guests.
I didn't bring him in here for a bunch of fluff. Number two,
it was the sort of performance the military establishment has come to expect of Jack Chain. General John T. Chain is the Strategic Air Command in attitude and reputation, SAC's commander-in-chief and unabashed salesman. His preparation to carry out the nation's nuclear war plan began 30 years ago when he picked up his pilot wings. From a base in Germany, young John Chain was ready to drop the bomb.
But the tension, that the probability of going to war was very high. And that's the environment in which we lived.
And today?
And today, it's flopped significantly. Fortunately, the Cold War, which we fought and won, it's a great victory.
Taking his command in 1986, John Chain became the epitome of the modern Cold Warrior. He is a man of definites, and his command reflects it. When Chain cites military history to illustrate his wariness of the Soviet Union, as he often does, he is either heard as the voice of reason or as a Cold Warrior out of touch.
They went back into Hungary, didn't they? Didn't they go into Czechoslovakia? Didn't they go into East Germany? Didn't they go into Poland? I'm not predicting any of that, but I'm just saying I'm a student of history, and there's too many times that a pendulum's banged against the wall and came shooting back very quickly, and I just think that we ought to be a little more mature than I have a sensing our country is going.
Every airman entering the command's headquarters in Bellevue, Nebraska, is greeted with the chain battle cry. The role of SAC men and women is to be warriors, and don't you forget it. That challenge does not hint of the uncertainty felt by some in SAC's corridors. Uncertainty about changes in world politics, reshaping the basics of nuclear strategy. Uncertainty about the impact of budget cuts on SAC's wish to modernize its weapon systems, and on the job security of enlisted men and women. Uncertainty about enemies other than the Soviet Union. Life in the Strategic Air Command seemed so much easier when the world appeared to be in black and white.
The atomic bomb fleet rendezvous for A-Day.
Before there was a Strategic Air Command, there was the bomb, the atomic bomb. The first peacetime A-bomb test was SAC's first mission with the weapon. The command had been created after World War II. Military leaders saw the destructive power of the massive, strategically placed bomb drops that brought an enemy to its knees. The atomic bomb carried that theory to its extreme.
Even with these goggles, they saw a stab of light as brilliant as lightning, while those without goggles turned their backs and shielded their eyes with their arms. The bomb is away. It's falling. Seconds tick away.
On the 1st of July, 1949, a SAC B-29 named Dave's Dream let loose its single charge over the chain of Pacific Ocean islands called Bikini Atoll. 73 surplus warships of a mock navy took the force of the blast.
One world at the crossroads watches and ponders the lessons and the future of the atom bomb.
In the beginning, the Strategic Air Command, understaffed and poorly equipped, required 5 or 6 days advance notice to deliver an atomic payload. Nonetheless, the atom's power carried a strong political message to the aggressive communist leaders in the Soviet Union. As World War II ended, they asserted a political claim to their Eastern European neighbor countries, East Germany, the Baltic states, Hungary.
The avenue to freedom is brief, as night descends on liberty behind the Iron Curtain.
The United States, the only nation equipped with atomic arms, responded with a stance the military men called deterrence, contained the Soviet Union's move to control Europe using the fear of an American nuclear attack. The mission assigned the Strategic Air Command, preparing for a nuclear air raid, meant reaching targets deep in the Soviet Union. Flight times for bombers increased dramatically when Air Force engineers perfected a system to refuel planes in midair. It made possible the first round-the-world flight in a plane called Lucky Lady 2.
Well, we left Fort Worth 4 days ago. We crossed 4 continents and 7 oceans and seas.
When Stalin learned of America's bomb, he told an advisor, "Ravnovesi narushilos," the equilibrium has been destroyed. The equilibrium was restored in 1950 when the Soviets got a bomb of their own. Immediately, the United States unveiled an even more powerful hydrogen bomb. The Soviets caught up within months. The arms race had begun. It was becoming a dangerous world. SAC's command center, vulnerable to attack, moved from Washington to smack in the middle of North America, off at Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska. It was an early change of a tough new commander, General Curtis LeMay. The general first convinced President Truman to spare SAC from post-war defense cuts and joined President Eisenhower in backing an astonishing variety of new warfare technology. By the mid-50s, the Strategic Air Command included included missiles in its arsenal.
With this fast-growing array of power, the United States Air Force's Strategic Air Command will continue to play its vital role of deterrence in the defense of the free world.
The combination of missiles, bombers, and new sea-launched weapons gave the United States a three-cornered strategic force, a triad. It was designed to make America feel more secure. That was before 1957, and Sputnik. Launching the small metal satellite convinced Americans their enemy could destroy them from the heavens.
There's a missile gap, definitely, and it's obvious that the Russians have done something that we cannot do.
No hard intelligence proved the Soviet Union had more or better rockets. Nonetheless, that belief guided American strategic weapons policy for the next decade. The Strategic Air Command estimated the U.S. had only 15 minutes to react if the Soviets launched first. 1 month after Sputnik, SAC began its alert program. One-third of the command's bombers would be armed, gassed up, and ready to attack 24 hours a day, every day of the year. The United States and the Soviet Union talked of trying to create a world without nuclear weapons. Attempts to negotiate a ban never succeeded. The 1960s opened with the superpowers distrustful and on the defensive. The Soviet Union, appearing the frightening bully in the person of its premier, Nikita Khrushchev, provided the most concrete symbol of the Cold War, a Kremlin order to the East German regime to seal its borders, dividing the city of Berlin with a wall.
East German troops swooped down on the border between Red Berlin and the Free City in the pre-dawn hours.
Khrushchev threatened to deal crushing blows to his adversaries. The world assumed he meant those blows would be nuclear. That's why the photos taken by a Strategic Air Command spy plane over Cuba in October of 1962 were so frightening.
Within hours after they were taken, photo interpreters in Washington are studying the photographs. The evidence is unmistakable. In one giant step, Russia is giving Cuba an offensive nuclear capability that can strike at the heart of the United States.
On October 22nd, President Kennedy told a nationwide television audience he was calling Khrushchev's bluff.
To halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated.
The Cuban Missile Crisis was as close as the Strategic Air Command ever came to carrying out its ultimate responsibility. All 200 intercontinental ballistic missiles were placed on 24-hour alert. Every bomber carried a nuclear payload. The gamble worked. 6 days after the gauntlet had been dropped, Khrushchev told Kennedy he would remove the missiles.
The record of SAC in mobilizing the force of the United States was unprecedented in the long history of SAC.
It would be the last time the United States and the Soviet Union would go toe-to-toe with nuclear weapons. The Cold War battlefield became numbers on paper. Who could assemble a nuclear force greater than the other?
This spring, the B-52s flew their 10,000th sortie in support of Southeast Asia operations, marking the delivery of over 190,000 tons of high explosives.
Superpower confrontation was replaced by a series of remote battles over small pieces of geography. In Vietnam, SAC B-52s pummeled Viet Cong bases with more bombs than had been dropped in all of World War II. A losing war raised doubts about the effectiveness of strategic bombing against guerrilla forces. Throughout the 70s and 80s, the nuclear stockpiles of both nations grew as the planes and missiles used to deliver them became ever more sophisticated. Efforts to curb the numbers of weapons through nuclear arms treaties found the Strategic Air Command fighting for every new weapon. Victories like the cruise missile and the B-1 bomber were balanced by setbacks like the never-ending battle to make missiles mobile on trucks or rail cars.
Your Air Force, with the help of your American defense industry, has and will continue to push high technology, not because of some Air Force infatuation with fancy new weapon systems, as some of the armchair strategists in Washington will sometimes contend, but because it's the only way that we can respond to the Soviets' increasingly sophisticated arsenal of weapons and military personnel.
Now the Cold War is over. The wall has been torn down. democracies struggle for survival across Europe. The Soviet Union, split by the failure of its monolithic communist system, may have lost its billing as a superpower in every way, but its still impressive military. That seems to be all that remains of the Cold War, the war machinery. Miles away from SAC headquarters, beneath the wheat and rangelands of Nebraska, a 95-ton Peacekeeper missile carrying 3 nuclear warheads hides inside a silo of shockproof, ultra-hardened concrete. 60 others just like it wait for electronic permission to launch. Permission has never come. Perhaps it never will. Every day at 10 a.m., there is a nuclear age changing of the guard at the site known as H1, Hotel to its residents. The same shift change is underway at 5 separate launch control centers of the 90th Strategic Missile Wing, headquartered a couple of hours away at Warren Air Force Base, Wyoming. This is a no-nonsense compound where unauthorized visitors are greeted by shoot-to-kill guards. The crew descends 60 feet underground to be sealed in a capsule of steel and hardened concrete. 2 30-ton steel doors protect the launch team. Today, that job rests with Doc and Wildebeest. Doc is the commander, First Lieutenant Mark Langendorfer. His deputy is Second Lieutenant Bert Scott, nicknamed Wildebeest. Their job is to make sure their Minuteman missiles can be launched if ordered.
Well, if the system doesn't work, then we don't have very much deterrence. If I were pointing a gun at you and you knew it wasn't loaded, you wouldn't be very scared, would you?
The Peacekeeper missiles, their name an oxymoron created by the Reagan administration, has been armed since 1986. Through 4 classes of missiles controlled by SAC, the job of a missile crew on alert hasn't changed substantially. For 24 straight hours, the commander and his deputy work literally shoulder to shoulder. Food is catered from a kitchen topside. If one sleeps, the other stays awake. The day is filled with repetitious tests of launch and communications equipment.
Program select to skip. Steps 21. Program select to off. Offset. Flight to off. Offset. We're done. We're complete with this checklist this time. Do you agree? Agree. Checklist complete.
In this sealed war machine, it might seem the Cold War rages on, that the threat of nuclear annihilation is as great as ever. Lieutenant Langendorfer knows the world has changed, even if his job has not.
I was out here the day that the Berlin Wall, they jumped up on the Berlin Wall, watching that on TV in the morning, live, getting the satellite uplink, and that was wild, just fantastic to be able to see that and see the efforts of what all that we've done and our country has done to bring about that change.
If the order were to come from the President, the order to launch, Doc and Lieutenant Scott would first hear a distinctive warbling tone.
It's printing out right now. You might receive a message just like this. We would, assuming I had 1 copy, I would read it off to him, or if I had 2 copies, I would hand him a copy. We would decode, getting out our decode manuals.
X-ray. 2, 3.
After we decoded the message, assuming it's a lawful order from the President, we would come to this box and authenticate it. That is, making sure it's a lawful order. I have a combination of one of these locks. Crew commander has a combination of the other. No sole person will have authority to launch weapons upon his own. We would have responsibilities upon ourselves, such as enabling the missiles, getting them ready to go. This would include enabling them with this panel. And after we've issued all the commands to the missiles, we would coordinate our key turn. We'd give a very short countdown, and missiles would launch, hopefully.
The missiles, guided at the hand of Doc and Wildebeest, would travel up to 6,000 miles over the Soviet Union. 3 warheads, each assigned a pre-chosen target, are designed to land within 350 feet of the mark. Even in a world where the evil empire struggles with the concept of democracy, the turnkeys of nuclear firepower don't question in order to fire.
With all the changes that have undergone in the Soviet Union, it puts it in a different light, a different perspective. But it's still an important job. We still
technology about guns pointed at each other. Maybe today we might be able to say that the guns are a little bit, they might be on safety, or they might be pointed up in the air for right now. But they could go either way. They could be brought back down to fire, they could be unloaded, and we'll just have to wait and see.
It'd be nice to see this wouldn't be here. That'd be a nice feeling.
How so?
That this wouldn't be necessary.
Might live a longer and happier life.
Hotel Launch Control Lieutenant Lander speaking.
Until that final treaty is signed, the one that could turn these prairie silos into Cold War relics, crews of starched and polished officers continue to rehearse for Armageddon.
I agree, that's true.
Но отношения между нашими странами за последние 5 лет значительно улучшились. Пожалуй, главным показателем этого являются широкие контакты между нашими народами и большая объективность, чем раньше, в информации друг о друге. Советский Союз и Соединенные Штаты
Soviet people's notion about U.S. policy toward the USSR is changing gradually. Evidently, something like that takes place even in the United States as well.
Evidently, that is true. When Premier Gorbachev's closest military advisor testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee, Air Force officers grumbled that a Russian general is treated more politely in Congress than the Strategic Air Command. Budget battles over big-ticket weapon systems obscure the central issue. Basic military strategy will change in the face of tighter budgets. Defense analysts and former Cold Warriors are rethinking what it takes to keep the country secure. The presidency of Ronald Reagan provided plentiful years for the military. Dr. Lawrence Korb, as an Assistant Secretary of Defense, believed the Pentagon needed everything it asked for in the face of a real and growing Soviet threat. Today, as a defense analyst for the Brookings Institute, Korb believes the military in general, and the Strategic Air Command in particular, is out of touch.
I think General Chain sort of manifests this identity crisis. He keeps going around the country saying, you know, we need all of these new bombers because of these targets in the Soviet Union we have to attack. And the American people are saying, why would we want to attack the Soviet Union? For what purpose would we want to attack it? We want to deter it. But the idea of us wanting to, you know, attack 10,000 targets in the Soviet Union, which, you know, SAC has in its target list, is just simply absurd today.
When serving in the Navy, Admiral Eugene Carroll was considered a renegade liberal for his views of nuclear weapons. Now, as a deputy director of the like-minded Center for Defense Information, he grows ever more convinced the nation's Cold War posture must change.
For 40 years, we pursued a Cold War in which we had an identifiable enemy. It was them and us. And everything we could do to intimidate or gain superiority over that recognizable enemy was to our benefit. The equation doesn't work anymore.
There seems to be some weak knees back in Washington on Capitol Hill that don't seem to see it that way.
General Chain, of course, will have none of it.
The American people have to be told a very sobering, honest, realistic story, and there are lots of kooks out there and twits that are telling them different things, and
Occasional name-calling has not helped Chain's case in Congress. His command is in the same difficult spot as every other branch of the military. Each argues its mission is essential in the new and uncertain world. Senators and congressmen faced with a budget deficit gone wild tell America's fighting forces they must change their ways.
So what we have in the Pentagon today are people who have been trained in supporting the military and building it up, and have not had any training, basically, in how to reduce that.
Western defense policy must be made in light of the cold reality of this growing military strength, and not on the carefully chosen words coming from the Soviet Union.
The Department of Defense claims to keep any current or future enemy at bay, it must constantly modernize SAC's weapons.
We are in relative balance with the Soviets today. We can be at relative balance with the Soviets at lower levels, and that's what the arms control are all about. As long as we have modernized forces, because the Soviets have continued to modernize their forces, if we're going to stay in relative balance, we too have to have modernized forces. So we're going to have the B-2.
The B-2 is the very symbol of SAC's post-Cold War budget battle. The stealth design makes it nearly impossible to detect on radar. It could fly very fast and very low into Soviet airspace. The Defense Department and its congressional allies argue the aircraft is more accurate and flexible than any missile.
Because the B-2 would be a penetrating type bomber that would fly through the $300 billion worth of radar that the Soviet Union have there, basically undetected, and go in and have the mission to look and see what targets would be remaining after an initial attack.
The B-2, however, suffers major public relations problems, a huge price tag, and a mission that Congress and the taxpayer could never get clear.
It arrives after our missiles. We have over 7,000 warheads on missiles that can be and are planned to be sent into the Soviet Union before the first bomber arrives. Now, what's going to be left to bomb?
As the cost of the B-2 edged towards $1 billion per plane, supporters became edgy, detractors became adamant, and General Chain put the full force of his 4 stars behind the B-2.
We owe the American people a force structure which can deter any nuclear power, no matter who their leaders are or what their intentions or stated intentions might be.
This morning, General Chain told Congress he would not support any nuclear arms reduction treaty unless it funded the B-2. SAC first claimed it needed 132 stealth airplanes. Early in the 1990 budget talks, that number was cut almost in half. By summer's end, the entire program was in jeopardy, perhaps leaving only 15 of the planes. More planes could hit more targets, but the numbers are already changing. Launch silos are being blown up for all the right reasons. Missiles have been cut up and melted down. In this cautious post-Cold War era, when the most disturbing threats rise from dangerous regional catfights, the Strategic Air Command continues to make plans for a superpower war. That plan is called SIOP, the Single Integrated Operations Plan. This roadmap for the nation's nukes is due for an overhaul.
The nation is not going to be willing to afford the level of nuclear deterrence that we have in the past.
As a member of SAC's airborne battle staff and a target planner, General Richard Getze stood ready to launch a nuclear counterattack when ordered. Now retired and a consultant on military matters, Getze argues SAC will prepare for war with significantly less nuclear firepower.
We could decide that we don't need as much damage, or we can't afford, fiscally can't afford, to support the levels of damage that we ask Strategic Air Command to, or the JSTPS, to apply right now. That would dramatically change the SIOP.
Such a dramatic change is apparently underway. Before the House Armed Services Committee, the Secretary of Defense hinted the nuclear war plan faces the most complete overhaul since the Cold War began.
We are, in fact, looking at the targeting requirements. That's a subject that occurred to me some time ago, and so we are, in fact, reviewing that. This is over and above the normal process.
A general with SAC's targeting group told us that anyone with a good economic atlas of the Soviet Union could figure out where the missiles would land. Target planners are guided by a presidential order explaining how the nation should use its weapons. Turning it into strategy begins with good intelligence, locating Soviet military installations and its leaders. The effect of enemy defenses on incoming planes and missiles must be considered. The capabilities of American weapons are calculated: speed, distance, destructive power. Other weapons must be held back for a second attack. Next, it's a process General Getze refers to as stretching string.
There's a specific target down there. There'll be a nuclear weapon number 1, 2, 3, 4, that'll be specifically assigned to that. And the way they do that is to take the intelligence that they have on the target and match that up with what's required as far as the damage that needs to be done to that target, to fulfill the strategy.
With 10 to 15,000 targets and enough weapons to destroy every Soviet city with a population equal to Lincoln, Nebraska, critics label such massive destructive power overkill. SAC historically denies stockpiling more weapons than it needs, but soon the limits imposed by the growing budget deficit will force a reduction in the number of targets.
I think that there's going to be a new strategy coming. And I think that that strategy can probably be adequately described by saying affordable deterrence. I think what's going to happen is we're going to be given a certain amount of money and have to deter the best we can within that. And as a result, you're not going to be, fiscal constraints will be more important than threat.
Obviously, the threat has changed. There is the matter of the Warsaw Pact. It no longer exists. The United States no longer has targets in East Germany or Czechoslovakia or Hungary. Others in Washington believe even the non-military targets within the Soviet Union can be drastically reduced.
We have a very high requirement to target their economy. Their economy is a mess. The wags around said it's so hard to imagine what we could do to with nuclear weapons to their economy that they haven't already done to it themselves.
The strategic arms limitation talks, START, are guiding the superpowers towards smaller arsenals. The United States would get rid of about 2,000 weapons. 10,000 weapons would still be pointed at the Soviet Union. General Chain claims that's not enough.
And I feel very uncomfortable as we go down the slippery slope until someday my successor says, Mr. President, I can't do the task you told me to do. That scares me.
As long as the United States seeks that extra edge over its superpower counterpart, it's likely the Soviet Union will continue to do the same. Soon, matching weapon systems brand for brand may be replaced with a healthy respect for the destructive power of the handful of weapons left after negotiations.
The SAC Command Center. This is a two-story building with the bottom floor being approximately 40 feet under the Earth's surface, and that's where you are now, about 40 feet under the Earth.
This is the message given to Rotary clubs, scout troops, and U.S. senators visiting the Strategic Air Command's underground command post. Here, SAC's battle staff would carry out the president's orders in a nuclear war. In a sense, the power on display here is an illusion. In truth, the command center has been remodeled more than it has actually been used for its intended purpose. The last time SAC's battle staff took their stations for real was in October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Above ground, the rituals of the Cold War continue along the flight line of Nebraska's Offutt Air Force Base. To test their readiness, occasionally crews of the Looking Glass Airborne Command Post are scrambled to their battle stations. Since February 1961, SAC kept one of these specially equipped Boeing EC-135 jets airborne.
The name Looking Glass comes from our ability to mirror the functions of the SAC Command Center. Aboard this aircraft, we have all the classic staff functions, such as plans, intelligence, logistics, and communications.
Even before one landed, another Looking Glass was in the air. A crew of 24 could control the nation's nuclear forces should the underground be flattened by surprise attack. Round-the-clock Looking Glass flights became a relic of the time when the Pentagon assumed the Soviet Union would launch a massive first strike, the bolt from the blue. Today, it is imponderable.
There is a sensing that that you don't casually start threatening each other with use of nuclear weapons. And back in the late 1950s, early 1960s, that wasn't the case.
With increasing pressure to cut his budget, General Chain lowered SAC's nuclear shield slightly. Chain recommended Looking Glass end 30 years of constant vigil.
A number of us had to fight to get into the outfit because it was something we wanted to do. And when we heard the rumors of them grounding the Looking Glass, it hurt.
President Bush stalled grounding Looking Glass, fearing it would send the wrong message, the message of lax defenses to the Soviet Union. Finally, saving at least $18 million a year became the proper message. Looking Glass won't go away. As long as there are nuclear missiles, the Joint Chiefs of Staff and SAC will need a backup to their underground command posts. Meanwhile, the rest of America's nuclear forces remain cocked and ready to fire. SAC's alert program keeps bombers and missiles ready to respond to the nuclear high noon feared at the height of the Cold War. Every day, up to one-third of the command's nuclear-equipped bombers line runways ready to fly at a moment's notice. 1,000 Minuteman and Peacekeeper missiles stand constantly ready for launch. The theory of deterrence remains, but the amount of force backing it up may be due for a change.
I think SAC is going to have to plan for a smaller future, fewer weapons, a less ready future, in the sense that I think SAC will end up having to reduce their alert force.
You'll still have nuclear weapons on alert and ready to fire, but the idea of having so many bombers deployed all of the time to prevent a Soviet attack from a bolt out of the blue becomes less and less likely, because the Soviet Union has basically given up its expansionist aim. It cannot save significant amount of money by reducing the alert force. We could save a few dollars, but what it would really do is change the lifestyle of the people. I would like to be able to do that. But on the other hand, I feel more comfortable knowing that we do have missile crews with the missiles 24 hours a day.
Missile crews are likely to stay on 24-hour watch. Removing missiles is a political impossibility until the Soviets do the same. Reducing the bomber alert program is a possibility. Half the nation's B-52s and all of its 111 fighter bombers face retirement. The B-1B bomber is ready to respond, but not in the numbers SAC would like. Ultimately, the decision will be made by the President based on what message he is ready to send to the rest of the world. Relaxing SAC's alert status is possible because of the quality of its spying. Having spent decades studying Soviet military behavior and procedure, the intelligence operations staff can spot any changes in routine that might signal preparation for an attack. It gives the Pentagon days and even weeks of advance notice. With the budget so tight, however, even the spies are cutting back. The SR-71 Blackbird created an aerospace legend because of its speed and extraordinarily precise aerial photography. As the cries for less defense spending grew, the Air Force abruptly retired the SR-71. Now it's on display at the SAC Museum, despite proving to be an outstanding complement to spy satellites.
With any arms reduction, you have an increased requirement for intelligence and confirmation. But those are decisions way above my pay grade. I just fly the airplanes.
Or he used to. Grounding the major spy plane saved the SAC $300 million a year. The trade-off for the Pentagon was in its intelligence operations.
I don't have the SR-71 anymore. Neither does the President have it anymore. So if he says, Jane, I want that picture tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock, I say, boss, can't do. I don't have anything that can get there by 6 o'clock tomorrow. I could if I had the SR-71, but I can't. I'm not mad at him for that. I'm just saying when the dollars go down, the United States of America has lost combat capability.
It's kind of like being in my estimation, it's like being a professional athlete and finding yourself on the playing field one week and then in the stands the next week.
As SAC selects its budget priorities, every level of the command stands to lose something. Pressure from tighter budgets lands hardest on enlisted men and women. Personnel and maintenance, security, and operations work up to 50 or 60 hours a week. In a move that may be equal parts military discipline and consummate politics, SAC's Commander-in-Chief is initiating Project 40. The 40 stands for retaining a 40-hour work week, even as layoffs increase. The closest equivalent to Project 40 in the private sector might be called a work slowdown.
And there will be repercussions from that, but I'm not going to put the burden of dollar cuts on the backs of our people.
General Chain calls it doing less with less. There is perhaps no better motto for the Strategic Air Command in the 90s.
Ready? Ready?
fly across Great Britain, and you often see small, abandoned airstrips, the archaeological remnants of World War II. At the Down Ampry Airfield, silent gliders once battled the Nazis. 2 miles to the southwest, the British hear the shattering noise of the Cold War still being fought. "50 years to the day when Winston Churchill promised the frightened English people the Battle of Britain would be their finest hour. A deployment force from the Strategic Air Command practices the next war. 5 B-52 bombers and 350 men and women relocated from Barksdale Air Force Base in northern Louisiana to the Royal Air Force installation at Fairford. A full-service Air Force base has been set up in temporary quarters. A complete communication system was hauled all the way from Louisiana. Makeshift housing is set up in an out-of-service military hospital. Food service practices dinner for 350 in the field. Under the code name Central Enterprise, this exercise tests the ability of NATO forces to work together. For the airmen, their future with the Air Force may be of greater concern than their ability to beat the Russians.
I'd like to have answers to all your questions. I know you have many questions, but we're all staring into the same fog bank at this time. And you've been an important part of history, and I think it'll go down that way. Thank you very much. Let's fly safe. We all recognize that things have changed. They're going to continue to change, but it's difficult to understand. There isn't anyone that I think would say the train has not left the station. They're just a little confused about where it's going.
The power and bulk of the hardware masks evidence of tighter budgets and uncertain futures. Many of the men and women in the military joined the volunteer force assuming few jobs were more secure. No more.
And that makes people apprehensive. It makes, I think, younger folks probably a little bit ill at ease in perhaps not knowing how secure a future they have in the military.
On the flight line, crews notice not so subtle changes as the Air Force becomes a bit of a miser in its daily operations. The budget cut anthem, doing less with less, is becoming an uncomfortable reality for ground crews.
We're always like out of money, like the next month right after we start, you know. So it's like we've got no money to fix planes or buy, parts, the small nitty-gritty parts, the little things you use every day, like splices and stuff like that.
But the budget cuts, less people, they got to do more with less. I don't like the budget cuts. But like I said, right now we have quality force, and with the budget cuts, they're going to end up forcing all their quality people out. Because anybody, you don't know where you're going.
In the natural selection of the military, it's survival of the fittest. The higher the skill level and more demanding the specialty, the less likely the upheaval in the ranks will have an effect. For example, the Air Force invested about $1 million in the 52 weeks of training that made Mark Myers a pilot. It's where he wants to stay.
If I don't fly B-52s, I'll just fly something else. If I don't fly something else, I'll just man a desk for 20 years if I need to. I came into the Air Force with a desire to serve the country and contribute the best I could to the Air Force's mission. Whether I do that in a B-52 or in an accounting and finance office, it makes no difference to me. Although I would prefer to do it in an aircraft, especially the B-52.
Coming back into our route.
As the chance for an all-out nuclear conflict shrinks, the health of the Strategic Air Command may depend on its crews honing the conventional warfare skills used during the strategic bombings of Korea and Vietnam.
Any questions on that? We do need the fuel to complete the mission, which is the 20 offload. If they have anything...
This 5-day mission is designed to simulate just such a war plan.
Questions at all on there?
Myers and his crew will team up with 1 or 2 other bombers every day with a load of non-nuclear weapons and drop them on a simulated enemy target. However, during a full week of bombing runs, not a single explosive device will be dropped. Each bomber, capable of carrying 30,000 pounds of bombs or 20 nuclear-tipped missiles, carries a single 500-pound reusable bomb made of concrete. It is a common money-saving device, even more common today.
Takeoff distance is 6549.
Waiting for the airport board departure, Sid, basically straight ahead out above 3,000 as assigned by ATC. Shouldn't be a problem in a right-hand turn for the transition.
Roger, approximately. And RAM. NA. Rough and crab set.
Cross dropping normal. Take off and land.
Next push button.
That was coming in. That's hold line half, sorry about that.
Myers and crew first maneuver their bomber over the English Channel. Minutes later, the bomber pulls close to a KC-135 tanker for mid-air refueling. This is one of SAC's most important wartime assets. Gassing up at 25,000 feet allows a jet to stay airborne hours longer. After 2 hours of weaving along the Atlantic coast, the crew finds its target. At over 400 miles per hour, Myers skims the bomber just 500 feet over an island off the coast of the Netherlands.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Scoring the only direct hit of the week, the crew reacts like kids in a video arcade. The mission is only half over. Now Myers steers his plane along a pre-planned course over the German and French countryside.
You got 2 F-15s, 11 o'clock. Roger, searching.
Periodically, a friendly fighter jet roars up from a NATO base, mimicking enemy defenses. The training is quite routine, but the cost only begins with the aircraft, and Central Enterprise will cost the United States millions. The Pentagon ordered a cost-cutting review of every training mission planned for 1991. If it's not essential, it won't happen.
But when you sort through what makes sense, how much money is there available, what training is the best, then some things fall on the cutting room floor.
Training cutbacks create serious side effects. Pilots and crews spend less time practicing fighting and safe flying skills, less time testing the hugely expensive equipment that taxpayers expect to function when needed. Fewer training missions also reduce the air traffic on the runways around the world. The United States, looking for bases it could do without, pulled Fairford off active duty. Its contribution to the peace dividend, $18 million. The B-52s of Barksdale were the last American aircraft to leave RAF Fairford before it was taken out of service. Perhaps someday it will become a Cold War museum piece, like Britain's silent glider bases of a generation ago. There are generals serving in the Strategic Air Command who were teenagers during the Cuban Missile Crisis. A generation of military leaders who honed their piloting skills over North Vietnam have only experienced a superpower showdown over the conference tables of a war game center. Us versus them. Good guys versus bad guys. Take 40 years of assumptions about the enemy and add them to the ash heap of history.
We were very concerned about this area and this area along the inter-German border, and that's where we dug in our defenses.
At the Air War College, why must they fight a classroom war that won't happen in our lifetime?
Kill ratios were very favorable for the Blue Forces. Based on the number of attackers that came yesterday and what we project for tomorrow, I would recommend about the same level, about 900 sorties, the allocated defensive counter-air for day 2. And with that, I think we've got them on the run.
Do you think that
A simulated battle underway in the classified confines of the Air Force War Gaming Center is being played months after the Berlin Wall crumbled. The scenario assumes the most staggering global event of the century never happened.
The major units of the Warsaw Pact supporting Soviet arms for what appears to be more than a small incursion.
Colonel Safransky is on hiatus from his duties with the Strategic Air Command to take a year's training at the Air University's War College. Today, he is the pretend leader of a theoretical Air Force in an impossible war.
And they've come up a lot faster than we thought they would.
Are any of our air bases in danger of being overrun on the ground?
Not by ground.
The officers know their war game seems laughable to anyone who's read a newspaper. Political realism isn't the point here. Military realism is.
What we're trying to get out of this are principles that endure, whoever the enemy is, however the enemy is armed,
This just happens to be a very powerful enemy that's going to teach us a lot, because the risks and consequences on our side of making a misstep are pretty high.
It is those basics of warfare by which the game players will be evaluated. Computers factor force strength, fuel supplies, and weather conditions, while down the hall, sinister forces scheme and plot.
Let's concentrate firing in on the rest of these guys in the north.
In a set of cubicles dubbed Red Square, a smaller team of experienced opponents counter the blue team's strategy. This phony Warsaw Pact war isn't strictly a matter of educational preference. When pressed, faculty at the War Game Center admit they'd like a more realistic game, but the world is moving too fast, and these games cost a lot of money to develop.
Czech forces, Polish forces, Hungarian forces, Romanian forces are probably not going to be moving westward except looking for employment. That's not a very stressful scenario. What do we learn from that? I don't know what we would learn. What we want is a stressful scenario.
New war games are in the works. One will fight a new Korean War. Another creates a battle with drug-corrupted guerrillas over the oil fields of Venezuela. The Air Force of the coming century needs officers ready to trade in Cold War tradition for the uncertainties of the New World Order. Jimmy Poole is the outgoing dean of Air University.
We had a clearly defined enemy when we had the evil empire. We studied the Soviet soldier to understand not only who he was as a military man, but to try to get into his mindset. And when you don't have that monolithic threat as you described, it's more difficult to define who your enemy really is.
Talk of a post-Cold War Air Force is everywhere at the Air University.
We are here to discuss Europe. We're here to discuss changes that are taking place in Europe.
Both students and faculty believe they are flying into uncharted skies.
Well, there is no enemy. You have this fundamental problem now of how you go about articulating something that is no longer black and white. A lot of the premise of what we've based our force structure on for the last 40 years has, in one day, been changed.
Colonel Charlie Crawford, 19 years of Air Force in his system, is on his way to a new tour of duty in the Strategic Air Command. In the classroom, he senses there is a different generation of leaders emerging.
I'm pretty sure I'm talking from an informed opinion that most of the people in the War College class now are at least vaguely dissatisfied that the Armed Forces leadership hasn't reacted as quickly as we thought perhaps they might.
For all the doubts and questions, the next generation of officers remain products of red threat defense budgets and a caution that comes with being the steward of the nation's nuclear arsenal. Their challenge will be to maintain a lasting peace while preparing for an unknown war.
Following Iraqi President Saddam Hussein's call Friday for a holy war against the United States, the Iraqi
Once a year, off at Air Force Base, shows off with an open house. Weather and world politics conspired to make it a dreary occasion. Just a week before, the United States moved into Saudi Arabia with the largest military force since Vietnam.
Well, obviously, there's things going on in families and people are worried about their husband or their son or their daughter going somewhere. And it's a kind of a serious mood, and you can just sense it, you can feel it, it's kind of in the air.
The civilian and military families slogged through the rain to look at the machinery that might be called the battle against Iraq. The Middle East, it is argued, has proven the need to maintain a strong defense. But those events also underscore SAC's awkward fit in the new equation for defense. The premier attraction at this Strategic Air Command Festival was an aircraft from the Tactical Air Command, the force on the front lines of warfare. The F-117 stealth fighter is the world's first operational aircraft designed to stump enemy radar. It has already been used in Panama, and this jet, once finished showing off for the air show, was deployed to the Middle East. Its mission is clear.
This is the airplane of the future. It's designed as a very precise targeting platform. It can hit very precise targets at night in very heavily defended areas, and it's the only airplane in the world that can claim those type of missions. I think for the full spectrum of combat, this airplane can be employed.
Sitting on the flight line just a few hundred yards away from the stealth fighter is SAC's top-of-the-line bomber, the B-1B. Airshow fans were puzzled to learn this plane wasn't going to the Middle East.
Well, they have to understand that as long as nuclear deterrence, it's not, at this time, it's not stopping side. Although that capability is being developed, but we don't have it yet.
Pilot Phil Landman isn't going to the Persian Gulf because he transferred out of air tankers and into the B-1. Air tankers and a small force of B-52s were among the few SAC units on active duty in the Iraq conflict. SAC supported tactical forces with air-to-air refueling and reconnaissance, but for all its power, it was not a major part of the combat mix. In the new wars, the smaller wars, SAC's megatonnage approach to warfare may be out of step. But SAC's commander, speaking a month before Iraq launched its attack, argued a strong nuclear force contains more than superpower aggression.
You know, some island in the middle of the Pacific said to the United States, we're going to send a chemical weapon into Subic Bay or in Clark Air Force Base, and I have the capability of delivering it. The United States President wouldn't call him up and say, hey, you little twit, you do that, and I hadn't had enough capability and enough rockets pointed at you right now, we would make your island disappear. You know, I'm exaggerating for effect, but the point is nuclear weapons in the hands of a superpower with logical and reasoned people at the top gives the president a heck of a backup to whatever he says.
Ultimately, a nation such as Iraq might call the world's bluff, assuming the United States is not prepared to accept the moral and political fallout that would accompany the first use of nuclear weapons since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. If so, then talk of SAC's value as a deterrent in these conflicts is meaningless. For the Strategic Air Command, the questions of force and capability lock with the attitude of its leadership. There may no longer be a Cold War, but Cold Warriors do not fade away.
I do think we adapt to change, and I think that when a country or any organization decides to take a new course, and anybody who is a symbol of the old course, they automatically become a target to shoot at. That's yesterday's Cold Warrior, and they won't change.
Sometime in 1991, General Chain will hang up his 4 stars and retire. It will be up to the Bush administration to select someone to lead the post-Cold War Strategic Air Command. The next commander may find SAC's role and mission need not be in conflict with the goal of getting along with fewer nuclear weapons, if the command recognizes and accepts a lasting peace as it arrives.